She never told anyone her name. Not the real one. Not the one she'd had before the pens in Hedeby, before the mud and the reed roofs and the auctioneer's voice carrying her price across the quayside like it was nothing. Like it was the cost of a good axe or a sack of rye. But she told us this years later, when she was old enough that the salt had bleached her hair white and her hands were so calloused from the steering oar that she couldn't feel a fire's heat anymore unless she pressed her palm directly to the flame. She said, "The oar chose me, same as it chooses everyone who can hold it. You don't take the helm takes you." She paused then, and she looked at her hands, and that was all she said about it for a long time. What follows is what happened before that. Everything that had to break before something new could be built. Hedeby stank of unwashed wool and rot and the gray-brown water of the schley. The slave pens were not kept clean. There was no point. And the August heat made every hour inside them feel like the last hour inside something living. Brynheiðr had been in the pens 4 months. Long enough to know every guard's schedule, every creaking plank, the tide times of the market's main gate. Long enough to learn 2 traders' routes by ear. She'd never seen the routes, but she'd heard them discussed, argued, priced and corrected through the reed wall. She was 19 when she'd been taken. A coastal raid on the Frisian shore, before dawn, the kind of grey season raid that left no survivors with the standing to complain. She was 23 now. She was still counting. Ragnhildr Kettilsdóttir came to the pen on a Wednesday morning, which was the morning the better lots were shown. Ragna was the widow of Jarl Hákon the Fortunate, who had been fortunate in most things until a mainsheet block let go in a gale off Agder and took him across the temple. She had cargo to protect. 3 chests of Frankish silk that her dead husband had contracted to deliver to a trading house in Birka, and a crew she'd inherited with the ship. 40 men who respected her grief, but not, they were becoming clear about this, her authority.
I need someone who understands commerce, someone who can read a contract, keep accounts, and speak Frankish, someone the crew won't simply override.
The factor handling the sail didn't ask Ragna what she meant by override. He understood. Brynn was brought out in the afternoon light. She was not small, not particularly, but she had learned the particular stillness of someone who was always watching. The kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable, though most of them couldn't have said why.
She's being sold as a free servant. The arm ring is her price's marker.
The arm ring was plain silver, twisted once. It wasn't worth much. That was the point. They put her on the Hrafnskáli 3 days later. The ship was already provisioned, already crewed. 40 men, and the widow, and the cargo, and now 1 new addition, who carried her own sunstone tucked into her sleeve and said nothing about it. The navigator's name had been Bjarna the Sure-Handed. He'd been sure-handed until the 4th night out from Hedeby, when a loose stay caught him across the chest in a sudden jibe and threw him into water cold enough to stop a heart in 2 minutes. They'd tried to recover him. They hadn't. The crew discovered this problem 40 sea miles from Hedeby in building fog, which is the worst possible place to discover that no one aboard knows where they are. Ulf Ingvarsson had been steersman for 20 years on this and 2 previous ships. He was built like the dock posts that absorbed ship impacts. Wide, dark-weathered, permanently braced. His hands on the steering oar were the only steady thing on a deck that was beginning to panic around him.
Who knows the stars here? Speak up, anyone.
Silence. The kind that means every man on deck is counting his own ignorance. Brynn was amidships. She had been given no duties beyond keeping account of the cargo, which she'd done, and staying out of the way, which she'd also done, until this exact moment. She pulled out the sunstone, a flat piece of Icelandic spar, translucent white, worn smooth at the edges. She'd had it 6 months, bought from a Frisian trader for most of what she'd been paid for 3 years of household work before the raid took her. 40 pairs of eyes found her.
I've sailed the Skagerrak twice, not as crew, as cargo. But I watched Bjarna work the sunstone every clear morning, and I've been watching the star patterns since we left Hedeby. I know where we are. I can bring us through.
The silence had a different quality now. Not panic, something harder.
I hear it. The Hrafnskáli is speaking.
Ulf crossed the deck in 4 steps. He was twice her width and a head taller, and he stopped with 12 inches between them, close enough that his breath was visible in the cold air. Brynn looked at him for a long moment. Not defiance, assessment. The way she'd looked at every guard in Hedeby, every buyer who'd examined her like livestock. Not with hatred, but with the absolute calm of someone filing information away. Gunnar Skegjason, who had been rowing since before Ulf was steersman, leaned to the man beside him and spoke in the particular low key that carries anyway on an open deck.
Either she knows the stars better than Bjarna did, or we'll all die with the interesting experience of being navigated into a reef by a woman.
A beat.
Could be worse, could be a sheep.
Someone, not Ulf, made a sound that was almost a laugh. The tension didn't break, but it bent, just slightly. Brynn took the steering oar. The weight of it was... she'd expected it. She'd watched Bjarna's stance, the way he planted his feet wide, the angle of his shoulder set into the swell. She'd calculated the leverage. She was stronger than she looked, which was a thing about her that had saved her life twice already. What she hadn't calculated was the feeling of it, the living resistance of the oar in water, the way the ship spoke through it, the whole 30-oar hull, every plank and strake and join, translated up through the blade into her palms. The Hrafnskáli was talking. She just had to listen.
Navigation.
The fog came in at dusk. Not sea mist, the real thing, chest deep, swallowing the prow entirely. Brynn could hear oars, but not see them.
Wasn't wrong.
The masthead was gone. The horizon was gone. The world had been reduced to the angle of the swell against the hull, the compass of her own body, and the sunstone in her left hand. Useless now in the dark, but she'd taken her bearing at the last clear moment, and she was holding it in her head like a stone she couldn't afford to drop. Ulf stood at the stern rail and watched her, not with trust, with the particular attention of someone deciding whether the moment to act has arrived. The prow vanished into fog, and behind Brynn, in the grey nothing, Ulf's voice came low and absolutely certain.
You have until morning.
She brought them through. Not gracefully, not without cost. 2 hours of her not speaking, barely breathing, holding course by feel and star memory and the particular angle of the Skagerrak swell that she'd been cataloging in the back of her head for 4 days. But at grey dawn, the fog lifted, and the coast of Jutland was exactly where she said it would be. The crew didn't cheer. That wasn't the kind of men they were. But Gunnar, when he shipped his oar and looked at the familiar headland, did something that surprised everyone. He nodded at her, Once. The way you nod at something that has earned a fact. Ulf said nothing. He moved away from the stern rail and went below, which was either acknowledgement or the decision to prepare his argument for later. Thorfinnur Hávardsson, Finn, 17, second voyage. The kind of young that makes older men tired just to look at, brought her ship's bread and water at the steering oar without being asked.
That was... I don't know the right word for what that was.
Navigation.
No, I mean, they were going to throw you over. If you'd been wrong.
I wasn't wrong.
He looked at her for a moment. This boy who had been born free and had never had reason to think about what that meant. Then he looked away, across the water, and didn't say anything else. But he didn't leave either. Varbergness was 3 days east. A Frankish coastal village, chalk cliffs, 6 longhouses, a stone chapel. It wasn't on the trade route to Birka, but Ragna had a secondary agreement, the kind that wasn't written down. A local lord owed Jarl Haukar a debt in silver, and a debt doesn't die with the man it was owed to. The crew voted on it, not formally. They weren't at a thing. There was no procedure. They talked, in the way of men who have sailed together long enough that talking is the vote. And then someone said, "What does the navigator think?" The silence that followed was different from the silence in the fog. This one had edges.
As you command, Brynn. Then we don't touch the chapel until the children are...
Brynn laid out the raid plan on the steering board, in charcoal, with a piece of slate she'd found in the cargo hold. Varbergness had 17 armed men and a bell. The bell was the problem. Ring it, and the clifftop villages could see smoke signals for 20 miles.
The alternative is we wait until Thursday and use the elevator.
The plan was good. Everyone in the planning circle could see it was good. It had the clean logic of something that had been thought through from every angle. Finn cleared his throat.
The chapel, on a Wednesday morning. It's not empty.
Brynn looked at him.
I grew up near a Frankish settlement. Wednesday is it's a teaching day for children. The priest teaches the children on Wednesdays.
The planning circle went quiet. Brynn hadn't looked away from the charcoal map.
And those who vote for it? The vote is cast. The course is set. We must now heed the iron will of the jarl.
Gunnar spoke, slowly, the way he always spoke, like each word was being picked from a pile, and he was being careful not to take the wrong one.
You're talking about herding children through a raid, like cattle, past armed men who will be fighting.
Is that supposed to H-E-L-P?
You've never buried anyone.
The deck went absolutely still.
Not a crewman, not a son. You've never had to carry the weight of a name you were responsible for. You plan like a jarl who never had to bury anyone.
Brynn said nothing, which was the wrong answer. A leader would have said something, but she had no words for this particular kind of silence. She'd planned against every contingency. She hadn't planned for grief as an argument. Ulf, who had said almost nothing for 2 days, spoke from the rail.
And if I lead them somewhere sea-comfortable and they die there...
Then we die together.
The vote went against Brynn's plan. Not unanimously. Some of the younger men were with her, including Finn, who raised his hand with the uncomfortable certainty of someone crossing a line for the first time and knowing it. But the vote was the vote. Skapti the skald, who had been watching from a bench with his bone stylus behind his right ear, the hand with missing fingers, always that hand, made a quiet sound that might have been a sigh.
You know, historically speaking, most of the people who changed how we sail were also considered embarrassments at the time. That's not particularly comforting, but it's accurate.
Brynn looked at him for a moment.
Is that supposed to help?
No, just context.
She was still at the steering oar. She hadn't been removed from it. No one had formally given her the helm, so no one was quite sure how to take it back. The ship moved east under her hands, toward Varberg Ness, toward a plan that hadn't been agreed to yet. Ulf came aft as the sun dropped. He wasn't being cruel. That was the worst part. He was being honest.
Tell me about them. Tell me about them.
He walked forward. She stayed at the oar. And for the first time since Hedeby, Brynheiðr was not calculating. She was sitting with something that felt, if she was honest with herself, and she had never been particularly dishonest, it was a luxury she hadn't been able to afford. Like grief. Not grief for anyone specific. For the things she'd built her survival on. The certainty that being useful enough, smart enough, cold enough was protection. That competence bought you something permanent. But you can't navigate people the way you navigate fog. Dead reckoning doesn't work on human beings. She hadn't known that. She knew it now. If you want to know whether Brynn's command survives what comes next, don't look away. Subscribe to Viking Shadow Sagas. The next story sails darker waters still, and it won't wait. The lights of Varberg Ness were visible off the bow as the sun went down. 6 longhouses, a stone chapel, a bell that could carry 20 miles on a clear night, and Brynheiðr at the steering oar, looking at those lights and thinking about something she'd never tried before. Not a plan. Something older than planning. She went forward just after midnight, when only the watch was awake and the rest of the crew were wrapped in their cloaks on the rowing benches, breathing the slow, steady rhythm of men who sleep the way soldiers sleep, with one part of themselves always ready. Finn was on watch. He was sitting in the bow with his back to the raven prow, looking at the coast. Brynn sat next to him, which was not the thing a commander does. But she wasn't a commander yet. She was something between things, in the dark, with the sea moving under her.
Tell me about them.
Who?
The men. The ones I don't know.
Finn was quiet for a moment. Then he started talking. Gunnar, 2 sons, a farm on the Jæren coast, lost 3 years' crops to a late frost, and that was why he was sailing again at 46. Skapti, every story he hadn't been able to save from the last Jarl's death, he was writing them down, slowly, one at a time, with the 3 fingers that remained on his right hand. The 2 brothers in the middle benches, who shared everything, including a tendency to seasickness that neither would admit. Brynn listened, not making notes, not filing it away for tactical use, just listening, which was something she had not done for years, because listening without a purpose was a kind of vulnerability, and vulnerability had never been something she could afford. It felt strange. It felt like the oar in her hands the first time, the living resistance of something real pressing back.
Grant us peace. Grant
They
us
beached at false dawn. The cliff path team, 4 men, Ulf's choice, all of them veterans who'd done this before, went up before there was enough light to see a hand in front of a face. The plan, as agreed, was to wait for the bell ringer to be secured, then beach and close the net from east and west. clean, contained. The chapel's south lane would be left open, a concession to Gunnar and the crew's conscience that Brynn had agreed to and meant. The signal came. Ulf's horn. One short, one long. The cliff path was clear. The bell ringer was secured. The crew hit the shingle at a run. 20 east, 15 west. The net closing. And then Brynn, running along the shoreline with the eastern group, came around the chapel's south corner and stopped. The chapel door was open, not as an escape route, as a shelter. The Frankish villagers, not all of them, but the ones with children, the ones who'd been awake early enough to see the ship before the walk shouted, had put themselves inside. Not the armed men. The armed men were forming up in the longhouse yard, which was where the fight was. But the chapel had people who couldn't fight, who had put themselves behind a stone wall because it was the best protection available. Her plan had a south lane. It was clear. She could still close the net. She counted. 3, 4, maybe 6 seconds before the eastern group came around the chapel and committed to the longhouse yard. Once they committed, there was no pulling back without confusion, without gaps in the net, without the kind of tactical disorder that gets men on both sides hurt badly. Brynn thought of Gunnar's voice. You plan like a jarl who never had to bury anyone. She called it off. Not all of it. The silver debt was still real. Ragnar's claim was still real. The longhouse yard fight was already committed. But she put herself between the eastern group and the chapel, arms out.
I started last night.
The time has come.
Someone in the eastern group, not Gunnar, a younger man, started to argue. 3 words in. The younger man stopped. Not because she was frightening exactly, because she was standing between him and something he'd been about to do, and her standing there made him look at what it was. The longhouse yard fight lasted 12 minutes. It was brutal in the way that short, decisive things are brutal. Nothing drawn out, nothing clean. The kind of encounter that leaves everyone breathing hard and checking their own hands. 2 Frankish men didn't get up. One of Ulf's cliff path crew had a broken wrist. That was the total cost. The silver was brought to the ship. The debt chests were opened and counted by Ragnar and found correct. The Hrafnskáli was pushed off the shingle by gray morning light, the crew leaning into oars with the particular focused energy of men who want to be somewhere else. Ulf came aft. He stood for a moment, not at the rail, closer than that, at the edge of the steering area, looking at Brynn's hands on the oar. The leather wrap had taken the marks of her grip, hours of pressure, the shape of someone holding on.
Super steady, Brynn.
The storm god's hammer, striking deep, will awaken the serpent from its sleep. I have decided.
Ulf was quiet. The water moved past the hull.
So it is.
He'd said those words before, as a threat. Now they had a different shape. A pause. The sound of 40 oars and cold northern water. Finn, at the oar 2 benches forward, heard that exchange. He didn't look back. He just pulled his oar a little more cleanly, the way you pull when you're part of something and you know it. Gunnar, 4 benches further forward, noticed Finn's rhythm change and adjusted his own. The way it goes in a crew, the way something passes through a shield wall when the line holds. Skapti the skald took his bone stylus from behind his ear at noon, when the sun came out for the first time in 4 days. He had been composing something in his head for 2 days. He worked that way, building a thing in silence before he set it down. He wrote slowly. The 3 remaining fingers on his right hand moved with the particular care of someone who knows what gets lost when hands fail. What he wrote was a short entry, not a saga yet, barely a verse, but it had a name at the top. The name Brynn had given him in Hedeby the first morning, when he'd asked in that particular way of skalds who understand that names are what outlast everything else. He read it back to himself. Then he looked up, at her back at the steering oar, at the raven prow cutting north. Nobody answered, but nobody looked away from what they were doing either. And that was the closest thing to agreement you were going to get from 40 Norsemen who just had their world rearranged. Brynheiðr, Brynn, stood at the steering oar of the Hrafnskáli as the coast of Jutland came north out of the horizon. Her arms ached. The leather wrap had shaped itself to her grip. The raven carved in bog oak at the bow faced forward into the next sea, the same as it always had, the same as it always would. She still wore the silver armoring, the plain twisted one, slave price, the polite lie in metal that Ragna had put on her wrist in Hedeby like a receipt. She hadn't taken it off. She thought about it sometimes, the choice to leave it there. There was something she'd learned in the fog and the planning circle and the gray Frankish dawn. Something that wasn't in any navigation text or raid manual or military council strategy.
Aye, Brynn. It always has.
You can know where you're going without knowing who you're going there with. And knowing where you're going turns out to be the smaller half. The oar in her hands, the crew at their benches, the raven on the bow. The sea doesn't care who holds the oar. She does.
We're not done sailing. Done sailing.
The Hrafnskáli moved north. The raven prow cut the water. And the story, like all the good ones, kept going.